I'll introduce you. Meetings now live streaming. It's saying yes, we're live on YouTube and we should be live on Facebook now. So, yes, okay, beautiful. So we're live. And excuse me if I sort of toggle back and forth, as I'm, when you're speaking, I'll have it more on you. And but right now, let me introduce you. I'm really pleased, really honored and excited to welcome our wonderful guest today to the Tawasul Commons podcast. I'd like to introduce to you all Dr. Sabrina Lei. Am I pronouncing that correctly? I should have asked you before. It's correct. Oh yes.
Correct.
And Dr. Lei is an Italian philosopher, thinker. She's an Italian Muslim, interfaith and cross-cultural expert, Latin and Greek scholar, poet, writer, translator, and publisher. Her current position is as the director of the Tawasul International Center for Publishing, Research and Dialogue, which is based in Rome, Italy. Dr. Lei holds a PhD in ancient philosophy, which is from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. She's very well accomplished. Just to mention some of her degrees and accomplishments here. She holds an ecclesiastical license in bioethics, which is also from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and her dissertation was on the ontological status of the embryo in Aristotle's Metaphysics. She holds an advanced diploma in political philosophy. She also wrote a thesis a few years ago on the concept of time in the first and second, on the Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus of Wittgenstein, and also on another one of his works called Philosophical Researches. And really, Dr. Lei, who with whom we're going to be speaking and learning from today, she has this incredible breadth of not only accomplishment, but also outlook. And of course, I think the outlook sort of informs one's accomplishment, and training informs one's outlook, in that she's very much interested in sort of bridging the so-called divide, the intercultural divide. And I'd like to really sort of my talking, I'd like to sort of hear from her as far as her fascinating work in more recent months. She published a translation of the Bhagavad Gita in Italian, and which is in and of itself is a remarkable accomplishment. And I'd like to hear about Dr. Lei's, just understanding of the role of different civilizations, as it were, in this common human experience. How do we engage with one another? What is the kind of the ethics of engagement? What is the sort of what is the philosophy of engagement that you have?
So thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here today. So to share some of reflections about my work, about my thoughts. Yes, so I like a lot the expression of ethics of connection and ethics of interaction. So actually, this is what in the current world, or also this I think is not a problem of our time, of our contemporary time, but also this has been typical of the history of humanity. The problem of this kind of incapacity of different civilizations in the course of human history to interact in a level which does involve conflict. So this is actually, this has been the paradigm of the relation between different civilizations. I think that our time is need a change for different reasons. Because of the conflict could have be escalate in a way to threat the existence of humanity. And this is very quite a basic reflection that I think is quite shareable. But at a deeper level, I think human beings, they, in the course of their history, should have developed a different relation with the sacred. And especially people who reclaim to belong to a religion or to belong to or they recognize themselves as part of a religious group or of the profess a faith, they should stand a bit higher that that normal common way of interactions. So what actually I don't appreciate is when religious group they use religion to fight each other or to be judgmental against each other to actually limitate human freedom of choice. This is something that goes against the core of the nature given by God to human beings. So at the core of every human being, there is freedom. But the issue is that freedom should not be interpreted in a way of a mere instinctual a way of living without actually any limits. So, but freedom is the possibility for every human being to what we can call to express himself or herself in the world. So, or in the society in which lives, and also the choice to look out of their own cultural or ethnical space. So this is, I think, this is if humanity is given the freedom and along with education, they will have an impact. But this is this impact is not utopical, because we should think about the role of democracy in and how when the democracy can become a demagogy. So it's in the democratic countries that there is no education or there is no way of upbringing free human beings who are free in their not only in the way in which they express their identity, but in the way in which express their human nature, the capacity to understand or the capacity to reflect upon what is happening around them. They will be misled. They will be misled by every kind of or extremist attitude or extremist point of view that it can be from one side or the other, because extremism or integralism is not part of a religion, but is a psychological condition which is expressed itself in a typical historical or political social context, which has got some very clear features. So I think we should, in the West, this is our, we should preserve democracy, and whatever country democracy is there, it should be preserved at sometimes at the cost of retreating or moderate this what now is currently widely known as extreme form of identity politics. So this identity politics, which is tendency is to lock a human being inside his own culture, his own religion, or and this see different identities as opposed to each other, or they see the identity of an individual as monolithic. So I think it's impossible to think this is it's not only something that we are experiencing now in our globalizing world, that the identity of a human being is monolithic. It's not, I think it's never been, because as we know, even when a civilization they were engaged in a conflict at a wider level or a superficial level, it's always been an exchange. It's always been a great exchange of experience. This is at every level. So humanity is not, cannot be divided in well-shaped cut off identities who stand against each other or separate each other in a way that they cannot neither mean neither start a dialogue. And this is actually is a real utopia. So in every human beings can share different experience, because not only because we are part of the same humanity, but because every identity is has got in itself a part of difference. So there is a kind of the dialogical or dialectic relation between what is identity and difference. And a pure identity cannot bring any change, cannot bring any a change. Not always should be seen as sometimes some traditionalists of every religion, they see change as a kind of way of losing something, but through the change there is always way of gaining. There is always a way of improving yourself, and the only way in which you can improve is to relate with what is different from you. So difference is always the movement of every personal development, and also the development of civilizations. So this is adjustment in a way, also synthesis is what bring human beings at a further level of their spiritual and also, I think, political and social development. This is I hope that has been clear about
That's
it.
incredible. No, that's beautiful. I really, really appreciate that. I really appreciate the idea and really the reality that you're describing, that a sort of, to paraphrase you a little bit, a sort of solidified exclusivist identity cannot really bring about change in the world, or if it does, it would be through violence ultimately. But in order to in order for the individual and on an individual level, but also societally, communally, for a community to advance and ultimately for the whole world to advance, we have to have interaction with one another, with that which is apparently different, with people who apparently think differently from us. I mean, I'm reminded, of course, as you would know as well as I would, if not better, of the Quranic verse where God says that he created us, to paraphrase that, he created us in various tongues and colors and tribes and nations so that we may come to know one another. And it's really in coming to know one another that ultimately, of course, the beauty and the miracle of difference is a sign of God himself or herself. So I really appreciate everything that you've said, and of course in your own life, you're really a living example of someone who is always learning from different cultures. The fact that I didn't mention when I was introducing you, but you were originally Catholic, so you came from a Catholic background, but of course you're Muslim today, so you obviously learned about Islam and then decided to make that, as it were, shift. But if it were not through learning, that wouldn't have happened. And strikingly, again, when I first saw when you announced some months ago that you'd published the translation of the Bhagavad Gita, I just loved that. That made me so happy because, and I was reading also in one of an interview that you gave, how really this attitude to different religions, not least of all what gets classed as Hinduism, but that's a problematic, I mean, umbrella term, but will do for, sort of rhetorical conversational purposes. You mentioned how historically some of the great Muslim thinkers Al-Biruni famously, they studied very seriously. And he mentions that I would love to hear from you because you're the expert on this, that he cites verses from the Gita and as a means to show that these are people of faith, people who believe in one God, people of the book as well, which we forget. Very often Hindus in very simplistic surface level Muslim discourse get classed as polytheists. They're idol worshippers. They're not simplistic idol worshippers that we maybe are described in the Prophet's time, where the idolater said, you know, when they, after converting to Islam, they said, oh, you know, we would create an idol out of dates and then we'd get hungry and then we'd eat it. Like that. I mean, that's a very kind of low level. I mean, Hinduism, again, using that umbrella term, is a highly sophisticated metaphysical system. And it's not one thing, there are multiple. So I'd really love to hear further from you, Dr. Lei, about your experience translating the Bhagavad Gita, and what are some of the lessons from the Gita that all of us can benefit from, not least of all Muslims, and how again this is this project that you've undertaken, and you're translating other works as well, which I'd love to hear more about. That this is in keeping with the historic Islamic Muslim, shall we say, understanding of knowledge, that we benefit from knowledge wherever we find it, and we seek to sort of incorporate it into our own worldview in order to enrich ourselves intellectually, spiritually, and so forth.
So yes, it's actually that this project of studying the text of Hinduism that doesn't stop with Gita, because actually now I'm working on Upanishad. So I hope to publish some of the translation of some Upanishad with a wider perspective on the core of the teaching of these very important scriptures. So I think that there are two things here. One is why Muslims should not cut themselves off the intellectual curiosity, which brings them in contact with different cultures and religion. And this is something which is part of Muslim scholarship from the past and the classical times. So when Muslims were quite strong in their identity, this means when the classical time in the golden time of the Muslim history, there was not only a matter of political dominance, this I would like to underline, but of the mindset of the scholars. So the scholars of that time, they were quite rooted in Islam, in the Quran, in the Son of the Prophet, peace be upon him. But at the same time, this did not prevent them to have a view towards the otherness, which was inclusive, which was open. They were trying to find in the others what was common, not what was actually a feature to divide. So now we are actually experiencing the opposite. So there is the otherness is always by definition the enemy. It's something that should be forcefully assimilated, something that should be in a way deprived in a way or another of its own historical identity or historical experience or religious belonging. So as we know that in Islam that there is no compulsion in religion. So they should, and the scholars that you want to engage in peace building or bridge building among culture and religion, they should not have or assume a superiority attitude, superiority complex attitude towards others as they are prey of conversions. This is what sometimes I notice, that as I'm convert myself, this is an approach that I think is not very much, not rooted in the Son of the Prophet, not even decent from human at the human level, because if you want to really build bridges among the nations or among civilization, and the religion should know the others. So they should know otherness and try to appreciate it. Or sometimes, so you can also, it can be possible to assume a different perspective, or not to share, but always it should be rooted in respect. So I think the respect
And
is
not for the sake of conversion, as you say, right?
no, only for the sake of knowledge.
I mean,
So
very
I
often
think
Muslims show interest. It's like, oh, how can, like, how can I manipulate you? How can I get you? I mean, that's not what it's about, right? Yeah.
no, it's not. I think this is. I don't know what is the project behind this. Because
And that's not what it
sometimes
should be about, right? I mean, it should be about, it's a free discussion. It's about, this is where I'm coming from. Let me hear where you're coming from. Let's exchange, not some competition.
no, it's not
Like,
a competition. No, it's a matter of trying to find a common ground,
yeah,
a
yeah.
common ground of in which to build. So it's like that we are trying to find a way, and this way will help us to for to build a better future for the new generation. Because what I noticed, for example, that other religious people usually, except in some cases, they're quite ignorant of other faiths, and they have a simplistic view, and a simplistic view that brings them to assume a very much a very narrow attitude that is detrimental for the relation at the human level. So then when we want to say that, for example, of course, when we are speaking about with, there are kitab, so the people of the book, the dialogue in a way is easier, or it depends, it would be even more difficult. It depends on which kind of point of view people take it. But of course, it's easier for a Muslim to recognize that they are monotheistic religion, and because they come from the same Abrahamic roots, and they share the prophets, they share holy figures, and even if they read them in a different way, there is always a background in which they can recognize each other as brothers and sisters in that way. It's very bit difficult, and when it comes from when we are trying to relate to something which is quite remote from the experience of someone who is coming from a monotheistic religion, as for example, could be what actually is called Hinduism from a Western point of view, because they don't give in India the spirituality of India is such is so immense, is so deep that it takes it's not only something that you can experience through your mind, or you can understand through all intellectual process, but it's something very deep that you have to experience at a spiritual level. This is very difficult to express it. So because actually I think so some manifestation of Sufism in India, they have a close connection with the in some of the aspects of the Hindu spirituality. So I see this close connection. And for example, in Gita, there is what I find it extremely interesting from at least from my personal view, is the fact that the action should be done without the considerations of if it benefits you or not. So this is at the pure level of this
being
duty.
detached. So, sorry, being detached from the fruits of one's actions, right?
Yes, So this is it also reminds me not only of a kind of passivity or fatalism, because maybe people can somebody would have read it in different way, so that this kind of detachment in the long run it produces a kind of passive attitude. I think this is not this is a kind of duty. So what this yoga is related to the duty of human being as a human being. So in his limitation, but also in his great capacity given by the divine. So human. So this makes me think about the fact that the meaning of human history. So well, you have human history sometimes, especially in the West, when there is now a way of looking at religion as something which stands at a very much peripheral level of human experience. So actually religion is there, but people are very confused about what is the role. I'm not speaking about public role. I'm speaking about the role in the human being himself. So because what is public always it doesn't have any meaning if it doesn't come from the interiority of each human being, which is part of this life and this world. But the fact that history is not something that human beings do only, but it's not only something that human beings are victims, or they're not something they're not puppies in the hands of destiny. There is something which stands in between. So when I think that this fact that when indeed they speak about the yoga of the action, so the meaning of the action, so this means that this detachment, this is a great, I think, spiritual teaching, because this detachment brings you to the core of the duty, and the fact that humanity is the duty of humanity is to act according to some pattern of action, some ethics, some morality. But in the end, what comes out of human action is something that doesn't belong, or is not only the fruit of their action, because
this is
history
may
is
I pause?
done.
That's such a profound insight on your part, Dr. Lay, that it is a question of duty in service of humanity, in service ultimately of the transcendent. It's not some sort of capitalistic understanding that I do stuff because it will bring money, I do stuff because it brings whatever fame or fortune, what have you. It's because it's a fundamental human responsibility that we all have, every one of us, to one another, to the entire world, and ultimately to God. It's a completely different way of looking at things from a modern secular, compared to a modern secular viewpoint. I really appreciate that. That's a very profound insight. Thank you. Yes, sorry,
So,
sorry to interrupt, but I just really love that.
so it's actually history belongs to God, but is
Wow.
partially made by human beings. Is something that is a mystery.
Mm.
In the Because Western attitude now is reason. It should is something that it will explain everything. But the problem to appreciate fully human reason is to understand the limits of human reason. But the problem in the sometimes the Muslim world is not is just the opposite. They don't appreciate reason enough. The
Oh,
problem is that
interesting.
to understand, so
Yes.
to use reason in order to understand its limits, and maybe the limits they can be always push further, but always should be this humbleness, but at the same time this duty and humbleness, I think, is the key of personal development, and also the development of a society or a civilization.
Well, on the point that you just mentioned about the limits of reason, this is something, of course, that Wittgenstein talks a lot about, and he talks about. I mean, you know this better than I do, but the idea of taking the ladder of reason, if I'm remembering correctly, and once you're done with it, throw it away. And I mean, there's some very interesting sort of mystical intimations in Wittgenstein. So even the greatest, by many accounts, the greatest modern Western philosopher of all time, even he saw the limits of reason. And yet what we have, if I'm understanding you correctly, and this is kind of my intuition as well, that this, my sense as well, that in the Western context today, there's this overemphasis of reason at the expense of other things. And you're mentioning something very, very interesting, that in the Muslim context, very often, there isn't enough of an appreciation of reason. And not to say that there's maybe that much of, I don't know. I mean, I'm still unsure about this, that it's not as though there's this overemphasis on the transcendent per se. I mean, there is, of course, an understanding in this sort of idealistic sense of the role of God and the Quran and the Sunnah and so forth. But very often Muslims have a type of sentimental attitude when it comes to religiosity. It's not really grounded in any deep, you were mentioning yoga before, and as someone who practices a little bit of classical yoga, I know that it's deeply, deeply transformative and powerful. Hence I have this ring, which, I mean, it's actually blessed. It's a yogic ring, but so in the yogic context, as you know, as you were very powerfully pointing out, there's this kind of deep interconnection between practice and, not least of all, bodily practice, which then allows, which progressively helps us to liberate ourselves from this kind of low level of existence and kind of reintegrate us into a more transcendent dimension, whereby, as you're very powerfully again pointing out, that history belongs to God, and God is working through history, and we are at best, you know, if we're lucky, empty vessels of the kind of divine manifestation in the world. But yeah, that was very, very powerful. Please continue. So I mean, forgive my sort of occasional interjections. I'm just kind of soaking it in. It's very, very powerful what you're saying. Thank you so much.
So, sorry. As I said before, that actually what is in sometimes it's difficult to understand, but it's even more difficult to act according to what you understand. So this is a matter of continuous training, and continuous spiritual training is not only as is sometimes is a need, but also it requires a lot of courage. So courage is in the same way that intellectual curiosity can push people, then inspire people to look at at the otherness. If I can use this one as a otherness, it can be interpreted as a world in which everything is external to you, could be is represented. So what it brings you toward otherness, it could be intellectual curiosity, but sometimes is intellectual curiosity is a spiritual need. So we should it's like you be in a kind of Bedouin of the spirit, so that you cannot find that home anywhere, but in a way that there is always something that you carry with you, which is your way of being, your what you choose, because actually the choice is also the highest expression of human freedom. But at the same time, this the way of searching and have always have different spiritual experience or a different intellectual approach is actually something that it requires courage. So sometimes also this I know that especially in a more conservative society, there is a great fear There is a great fear of everything which can change the assets. There is a great fear of everything that express freedom, or everything which can liberate the human being, because there is no faith in humanity. This is the issue. There is no faith in humanity.
There's no faith in humanity. I love that. That's true. Yeah.
This actually, I don't know if you must have read about Dostoevsky when the legend of the Old Inquisitor. So in the end, this is very interesting, because it expresses the attitude of integralism. So in a way that the Old Inquisitor,
Dr.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Could you, for those, for our listeners who may not be aware of Dostoevsky's story of the Inquisitor.
Yes. So actually, the Old Inquisitor is part of one of the Dostoevsky novels with Karamazov brothers. And if I'm not wrong, but the importance is that the Old Inquisitor meet Christ but he put him in the jail, because this is Christ was in Dostoevsky a kind of the figure of this, according to Dostoevsky way of reading Christianity. He was a symbol of freedom and closeness to God in a way of human choice, humbleness, and also faith in humanity. So faith in humanity means faith in human being to be close to God, to be close to human being, to the capacity of human being to reach the divine, to experience divine. But the Holy Inquisitor, which is the symbol of institutionalized religion, or or better, a political power who use religion to control human freedom, they cannot stand the spiritual development of humanity. So the spiritual development of humanity, it is a threat to a lot of interests. So it can be political, can be economical, can be social. So we are, especially in the West, in a society in which consumism is the norm, and is through different channels, the customers, every human being is not anymore a human being, but is a potential customer. So that you don't only buy goods, but now you are going to buy ideas, and through the ideas you will be part of a circle. And if you try to break the circle, it could be destabilizing. And it is not only a matter of our time, but this is a matter of it's a matter of how humanity is called to relate. Every human being is going to relate with the divine. If there is no freedom, and if there is no way of getting close, or sometimes even far from God, this is. But the issue is that the sign that every human being is born with the fitra, is born with the nature which is connected with the human through his humanity, is connected to God. There is no way of a human being to be far from him. There are only different levels in which human beings are get close to the divine. And sometimes a way of this too much institutionalization of religion, or sometimes when religion is politicized, it is detrimental. It could be extremely detrimental for the spiritual development of human being. So it doesn't mean that we should abandon the.
May I just interject once more? Sorry, I mean, your points are so profound. God bless you, Dr. Lei. You're saying some very, very powerful things. That part of our spiritual development entails also not only closeness to God, but also distance from God, and never, and no matter what, ultimately God is omnipresent, and having, and this is a very, what you're describing is a very traditional, within the, staying within the Islamic context, it's a very traditional Islamic metaphysical understanding of things, that religion doesn't have to be, is not meant to be some sort of heavy thing that is imposed from above. It's a question of free choice. It's a question of freedom of being and becoming in the sort of unfolding of human history, which is ultimately divine history, which is very, very powerful and so beautiful. And you're mentioning of Christ in the story of the Inquisitor in Dostoevsky's the Brothers Karamazov, is that person who symbolizes that sort of freedom of the human spirit, whereas the sort of politicized understanding of religion, let's say in a sort of Islamic political context, one could say it's all about imposition. It's, you must be this way. If you what's the word? I'm forgetting about, if you sort of digress even slightly, then we're going to come down really hard on you. And the full might of, and we see it in all sorts of countries, all sorts of contexts, which is absolutely destructive of human spiritual evolution, as you rightly point out. It's so antithetical to the really traditional prophetic, whoever the prophet may be, whether the prophet of Islam or otherwise, the truly prophetic understanding of religious unfolding is one of freedom and flowering, which I really, really appreciate. Thank you so much. Yes.
So actually, if it's God didn't have, in a way, faith in humanity, he would not have sent the prophets and messengers. So this is what this is. If we think about the history of from the beginning of Revelation, the prophets were alone, lonely people. So if you think about Moses, or we think about Jesus in a way, and also Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and actually what they were in a way in a position of weakness. They were in a position of weakness, and socially they were in a, for Moses was running away from an Egyptian society where he grew up as a prince, but he was running away and without anything, so he was a fugitive. He was traveling when with his family, and most probably they were living in poverty when he received the first revelation. So the same thing, Jesus Christ, that he was as far as from the gospel, he was from a humble upbringing. So, but and also the Prophet Muhammad for him is the same. So, for all of them, they were in a position, what we could say, in a humble social position, or we can say they didn't have any power, neither in terms of money, neither in terms of the political structure of their time. But this is mean that through the revelation they brought to human being, and the fact that human beings stand for this revelation, they receive the revelation and the message from God they brought to humanity. Actually, that was a message which different messages, which Islam, of course, read as one messages read in different time, will change the world. Actually, this is where it was the great empires, or the great political powers, or the power of the Pharaoh at the time of Moses, that in the end all of them collapse. All of them collapse, and then but the spiritual, what is the message, the spiritual message, the religious message is still there, and still there even when it seems to be dry due to some different reason. But in the end, this is from something which is humble. When it receives a blessing, which is what we are speaking about, an historical blessings, it will grow. And as it happened for the Hebraism, or the actual revelation given to the children of Israel, and it happened to Christians, and it happened also to Muslims. So this is something that sometimes people they don't reflect much upon it. So because God can, this is the meaning also of the fact that history is belongs to God, and if it's not part of His plan, that even the greatest power of this world will collapse.
Well, this is so powerful again. Really, that I mean, to reiterate everything that you've said, some of the things you said, that the messengers of God, the prophets of God, ultimately were very humble people. Very often, they're fugitives in their own societies, and politically, socially, were weak. Uh, and God, in His infinite wisdom, chose to reveal the truth, the message, to these politically weak people, to ennoble them through His message, through His truth, and the truth ultimately is one. And as you very rightly point out, that all the great powers of the past, where are they now? They're all gone, and all that remains. And this is really a theme, powerful theme that's coming up in your discussion with us today, Dr. Lei, that it's God who is working through history, and if God chooses to bless something, that's the only guarantee of anything truly flourishing. And ultimately, without God's blessing, everything is well, as the Quran says, right? Everything, as God says in the Quran, everything is perishing except His face in the end. So even on one level, like even that which is blessed on this plane is ultimately nothing unless it's returned to God. And this is a very powerful metaphysical perspective that you're outlining, Dr. Lei, for us, which really, to my understanding as well, having studied the different traditions a little bit, this is a recurring message, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Hinduism, whether it's Buddhism, which is not theistic in the traditional sense as we understand it. But the great shamanic traditions, say of the Native American Indians, it's all about returning everything back to the Great Spirit, right? To use Native American language, and this is so important, and this is so vital. Could you speak a little bit, Dr. Lei? Uh, Well, about your work also, if you could continue a little bit about your work, but also your partnership, your very powerful partnership with your husband, who's a very educated, very cultured man himself, and some of the work that you're doing as far as well, maybe saying a little bit about that partnership, which is a very productive partnership, which we had occasion to talk about a little bit before we went live, because I think the people we have around us, if we're so blessed, they can really help us to do incredible work in the world. And if we are challenged with people who are opposing us, then that makes life so much more, not impossible, more difficult, but less. So the people around us, and your partnership.
So it's intellectual. And you know that some of that marriage can stand on different reason. So, but I think what a marriage which lasts long is something which is grounded in common interest. Is something which is shareable. So, and also of respect of personal space and personal dignity, personal freedom. So I think that most of the time that people see marriage as a kind of reproduction of power structure that they see in their society, and that they produce in their family. And I think this is something that it creates a kind of see, it's like keeping the appearance. So sometimes when you see that the perfect things is like a regime, you know, when it's like you go in, you visit the country which there is a regime, everything looks very nice on the surface. But when you just go on, just you dig, I think that we see that the power structure, it actually is so pyramidal, and in the end that it lets growth in a lot of frictions, a lot of way of when someone is prone to express himself or herself, or when there is also the children are grown in atmosphere in which there is only imposition, but there is no dialogue, there is no way of growing together, because sometimes even the parents can learn from their children, because the child is much more close to in a way to the divine during this upbringing. This is and to see that this malaise, this difficulties that people experience in family in which there is no dialogue, in which the power structure is very tight, in which the roles are very much designed according to a general perspective. I think this is in the long run it will be detrimental for the, even if the marriage may last or not, it's not the point, but how it goes, how it helps to improve, it helps to bring the people together, or it is like that two spirituality, they take two different they can take two different ways, and they can be only physically present in the same space, but maybe spiritually they are in two different worlds, and or the children, they will have a great impact. For the children, it will be a great impact, I think, to see this split or this too much gender roles which are too much tight. Of course, it must be a balance, because Islam teaches us to always have balance in our relations and to avoid the extreme. So I personally don't have children, but so reflecting what I see about the youth of the in the Muslim world, I see that most of the time from when there is this power structure in the family, that the children, they come out as rebels, or they come out as they see a religion in a very detrimental way, and they go on or from extreme form of rebellion, or they've got the same form of literalism. So they just became very tough in their interpretation and in their approach and the way in which they deal with others. So as my personal experience, so that I have been extremely lucky, because I think my husband did respect what is my individuality, and in a way, but of course, because we have got something very very much in common, and which is actually maybe we can sometimes we can see things in a different way, or they can have some different spiritual approach. From my husband is much more spiritual than me, I should say, because I'm much more materialistic from one side. It's much more I'm more practical. I got sometimes also very practical.
Well, but that's a good combination, because if both of you were too spiritual, then you would have no food on the table. It's a good combination. It strikes me as a very, I mean, just from what I'm hearing you describe.
So it's more patient in a way, but I'm more perseverant. So there is two aspects of sabr, so that I am more perseverant, but it's more patient. So it's very patient. And so this is also the way in which I think they express the religion it's not in a tough way, or not. It's more also, I think, the fact that to have an approach of religion which is based on knowledge. I think this is something which is of a great help I think because of there is always a confrontation, which is always a confrontation or a dialogue, which is not always seen as a threat to the so-called family peace, but it's always a way of preventing different conflicts. So I think that is always a dialogue is the best thing between people. And if there is no dialogue, most probably there is something wrong. There is no connection if there is no dialogue between people. And I think this is true at the level of the relation between husband and wife, or at the relation between parents and children, or whatever. This is the dialogue is but a dialogue which there is no, it's not a fight or a way of being right. When the dialogue you can, the dialogue can be it can aim at to assert your right, so that or it could be also a dialogue as a way of knowing, as a way of smoothing the differences. And I think that is the best dialogue, which is a dialogue which goes on and never ends. So this is the best dialogue. So I think that every relation should be an ongoing a dialogue which is going on, and not something that you put a dot. But it's always an open, should be, I think, inclusiveness, openness should be at the core of every human relation. But everything then, of course, it stand you want what God decided, which is the blessing, or what is the what is it, what actually it can be called as a kind of destiny, but not in a fatalistic way. So every human being is not at the center of the world, sometimes, as people assume. And they saw the best company is the company that you try to reach with the divine, so that the company of the divine, and this is will reflect in your relation with people who are very close to you, and also people who are not who are not close to you. This is we should not see ourselves in relation to others, but we should develop ourselves in order to be near the others. So near means to be supportive, to work together, to appreciate their humanity when we develop our own humanity in a best way. So what I noticed that sometimes women, they cannot develop their spirituality because they have got a relation with men which is very, very much complicated. So they look at men as a kind of something that they not only as a provider in terms of economical from economical side, but also a provider of their personal equilibrium, or their personal development, or psychological balance. And sometimes this, I think, is detrimental, because men, they feel too much overburdened by these things, and sometimes, and I think this is could create a trouble, because I think when of course, I don't have experience of growing up children, but I think girls, they should learn as the same. They should learn and to be taught like boys to relate to God for at the first instance, and not to overburden their partner soul with a lot of responsibility. At this, also, I think it will create much more spiritual balance among between the family. So between the people who belong to the same family. So this is my modest experience. Of course, that I didn't find much trouble, because maybe I don't know, because I think with my husband, we got, if for example, if he likes a book, if he gives to me, that I will immediately read. So it's rare that we don't find something that we don't like. But of course, that there are some political views, or there are some that I don't share with him, so that but I don't make it a mystery about it. So that is something that is there. So it's not something that I think different should not prevent people from collaborating with each other for the good. This is, I think, is the main the main approach that it could help a relation to go on and to grow.
Well, what you're outlining, Dr. Lei, is very, very profound again. Well, some of the things you mentioned, to recap for my own benefit, that very often what happens in the family context is some of the external power structures that people witness, they just sort of recreate those power structures in the context of a family. So, the sort of stereotypical archetypal power structures of the domineering husband or the domineering father, and the then sort of forced to be submissive wife, and then the children who are forced to be submissive, and it's really abuse. I mean, I unfortunately have grown up in a family like that, and it's torture. It's absolute torture. It's torture for the mother, it's torture for the children, and I think on some level it's torture for the father himself, but he just doesn't realize it, and it's unsustainable. It creates all sorts of incredible disequilibriums in everyone's lives. And I think in many ways, to echo in some ways some of the things you've been saying, that family, of course, we know is a microcosm of the wider society. And if we, instead of trying to replicate those very disharmonious and toxic power structures of the world outside within a family context, instead, if we seek to cultivate peace and dialogue, as you say, which should be ongoing, and not dialogue with the intention of, again, as you very rightly point out, with the intention of winning an argument, or with the intention of coming to an endpoint, but ongoing dialogue. How could such a family setup not succeed? I mean, it's not going to be perfect, because nothing is perfect, but it can only be nurturing, it can only be cultivating, and it can only result in goodness if, also, again, the parents are they're sort of mutually supportive, and they have a mutually reinforcing, they come from a mutually reinforcing spiritual perspective that's not divergent and is pulling in opposite directions. And then ultimately, of course, when that becomes the norm familiarly, and I think, I don't know, I think the family structure is falling apart worldwide. This is my intuition, it's my sense. But if the family structure were wholesome and nurturing, then how could that not then impact wider society at large? And the attitude to dialogue that you describe in the family context, of course, applies interculturally, intercivilizationally. It should always be a question of not seeking to win the argument, not seeking to impose our views, but genuinely seeking to understand one another, mutually support, mutually, to grow together, because that is the project. The human project must be, if this is to succeed on some level, which currently it's not. Anyone who has any illusions about where humanity is going right now, clearly they're asleep or something. Like, this is a big mess that we're in right now. Not to say that there aren't pockets, thankfully, of peace that exist, but it's certainly not enough. We really need to cultivate that. And what you've described as far as your own relationship with your husband, and you importantly point out also, it's not that you agree on everything, but that's the nature of human beings and human individuality. We're all individuals, and we're always necessarily going to disagree. It's not a zero-sum game. It can't be a zero-sum game. If we turn it into a zero-sum game, well, then some people are going to have to lose, and lose miserably. Well, ultimately, if other people lose, if I'm truly humble, if I seek to be humble and seek to be true to the religious spiritual ideals that exist around us, then I have to seek success in other people, not least of all my family, right? But there's some very toxic people out there, unfortunately. I mean, I know I have to deal with on regular people who only seem to be happy by making other people miserable. So there's some deep sicknesses in the world today, deep sicknesses, and I think, unfortunately, unless we really have a serious about turn globally, societally, where we rediscover these profound truths that you've been outlining for us today, then it's only going to be one that will be moving from ever deepening nightmare to ever deepening nightmare. Dr. Lei, could you speak a little bit about your work? For example, you've done and are doing some, as far as I understand, some very interesting work, in interfaith work, in conjunction with the Vatican, and can you say a little bit about your relationship to to the Catholic Church, just in terms of collaboration, and how your experience of that is, and what kind of lessons can we take from that societally, not least of us who may be engaging as Muslims or otherwise with other faith communities, maybe some life lessons from those very rich experiences.
So actually, that I did not. So the choice to be Muslim did not prevent me to appreciate what should be appreciated in other communities, or in the community that I come from, that originally. So I've always been grateful, actually, because I received from Catholic school the best education, so that could have been provided. So it was not, in a way, it was actually ecumenical. So it was especially in the way of approaching diversity. This is, I think, that is something that it remains, that I still going on to. I'm rediscovering day after day, because sometimes what you learn as when you are a young student, in the long run, it gives its fruit a bit late, maybe sometime, but what it remains is a kind of approach which is truly open, truly inclusive, and with that is also more or less rooted also in appreciation. So in a kind of appreciation that it is a way of respecting, respecting people's choice, but at the same time, even when, of course, that it could be not shareable, because it's clear that when you change your religion, when you change your religious community, that people who belong that in a so they find it strong, they can find it strongly, but maybe they cannot express just to you clearly. But of course, there is this feeling. But what I find is, especially the time which I got the possibility to have some programs, or some shared programs, or some lectures in the university that were organized by for interreligious dialogue, or for exchange of different religion point of view on different matters. But I always feel and find a great respect. This is something that was respect was not judgmental, and this, I think, this sometimes is what the Muslim they have to learn from this attitude. So it should not never be in a way judgmental of people personal experience. So, and always try to feel try to feel easy about yourself, about your choice, even in a context which can maybe not immediately welcome you in a matter of understanding, because sometimes when the knowledge of Islam in Italy was very poor, so that people come from a background which is not in which the knowledge of Islam is not very much developed, they can have a very, very wrong impression. And of course, when you are speaking about the hierarchy, when of course people that they study, they have different approach, but if you just try to have a relation with practicing Christian or which don't have the possibility to develop this knowledge about Islam, it could be there are a lot of friction. They could be difficult sometimes to relate. So, but I think that if you understand the people point and if you are not aggressive in your choice, so that this is helps. So actually, that my husband most of the time is the one who have got the relation and dealing with this directly for interreligious dialogue, in which most of the time they. There is a much more connection because he knew some of the people who work with it closely even before marriage, so that this dialogue is going on, and he participate to different ecumenical meeting and things. But from my point of view, that actually that I try to see when it comes, especially when it comes to speaking to Catholic, and trying to underline what is the common history of salvation, which is, or actually the fact that if we look at the spirituality, and even when there are some differences, because maybe in terms of Catholicism there is much more asceticism in a way, that this is what people perceive in a different between, for example, in compared to Islam or Judaism, that that is seen and interpreted much more relaxed in terms of the way in which marriage is seen, because or the relation between men and women are seen than, for example, a pure Catholic approach. But I think that in the end, what is the morality? What is the moral teaching of every religion is the same. So what is the Ten Commandments are actually that are rooted in every religion, and not and actually in every moral talk, even from a philosophical point of view, so that if we see what is in common is the way in which we relate to each other, in the way in which people act honestly, or actually the way in which they show courage. And this is a matter of courage, perseverance, and self-restraint. This is, I think, that is a base of every kind of in a meeting, and it's not only interreligious, but it should be every kind of encounter should be rooted in this capacity to see that sometimes, even if I to be a loser, in a way losing so something which is this means that to give space to other is a way of winning tomorrow, but not winning in a meaning of conflict, because most of the time that actually this is our society became a kind of narcissistic society. So if you can use a kind of terms taken from psychology, so narcissistic society which is self-rooted, but in then the way in which more you are self-rooted, more that you try to impose your identity, more your identity became start fading away. So in that this is and in the long run it creates only a conflict. So it's not every human being or every community, when the most important thing is to always meet at human level. So never have a judgmental approach. So, for example, I don't what I sometimes I hear some people who convert to Islam that I don't know if I heard them so through YouTube or something. This a person that they became very judgmental against their own community. So, why do you live? for example, the church or whatever, because I didn't like the priest, I didn't like the hierarchy. And but this is, I don't think that this is the issue, because actually there is so there is something wrong. In a wrong, it means that there are shortcomings, that there are ways that with things they don't work properly, and this is in every community. So we should not idealize any community, and at the same time we should not be judgmental or completely detrimental of express detrimental judgment, or to be a semi-judgment against a one community. This is sometimes that the problem is that human beings, they express the way their sometimes their psychological mindset, or the in different ways. So this is what I believe. This is in terms of what is my in how I prepare myself at the meeting, what I call otherness, or how do I relate with people belonging to different religions. Actually, I don't see, so I actually don't read, I don't, so I don't come with the prejudice, so I don't like prejudice. So for me, so a person is first of all a human individuality. So is the religion, is ethnicity, or it's a nation, or what is skin color, or whatever, it comes much later. So it's not something that in a sense it could be the feature of his being good or bad. This is I don't think that someone could be judged because he's a Christian, or he's a Muslim, or he's a Jew, or whatever, or he's from Africa, from India, or from China. The problem is that if he is a human, if we can appreciate a human individuality, and I think, and we always try to meet people at the human level, I think this is the best choice. And it's also it's a respect of freedom. And this aspect of creating, I think mostly they should promote, they should be promoter of a real space. So they should open a space in which there is freedom. So a freedom of learning. This is the reason why that I'm trying to convey different works, or different classics also belonging to his Islamic background, for that we are going to publish, I think 3-4 months, inshallah, that the whole connection of Sahih Bukhari, that is also, it goes along in a way that with the translation of the Quran, the commentaries, but also it goes with the publication also as in the past of Gita, and then also of Upanishad. Is to create what is a door of knowledge. This is so what we see, that when there is when we see that the world is going on in the in a way that there is and then we looking at how people deal, how what is the general partner of communication between people, between civilization, and between different cultures, and we see the outcomes, which is not very much which doesn't bring any benefit in the long run. I think we should start changing our point of view. So we should start changing our logic. We should start changing our grammar of interaction, grammar of thinking, grammar of way, so that maybe, I don't know if this thing doesn't have a relation with what I'm saying, but this makes me now think about, I don't know if you heard about that movie that I saw it several years ago, that is the Iranian movie Taste of Cherry. That is the story of some man that he wanted to commit suicide, but he doesn't have anyone who so he dig his grave, but nobody is ready to put synonym. And it seems to be, but there are some
That's brilliant.
yes, it's a very touching movie. You can go and see in the YouTube. But what is interesting, when he speaks with different people. He asked to a Afghan student, and he expressed to him what is the not. It expressed to him some religious way of thinking. But then in the end he meets somebody which was an old man and he expressed to him why he said he said that he actually was in the same spiritual condition as him, but he changed his his point of view. He changed his point of view when he tasted the flower of a cherry near the tree of his house. So, but then he not only expressed, he also said that that was a Turk that he has got. He said he went to the doctor. He said that, oh doctor, when I touch my head with my finger, I feel that I have my head is I feel pain in my head. I feel pain in my leg. Every part of my body is in the pain. So I cannot bear it. But the doctor said that, of course, because your finger is broken. So sometimes that we don't understand that if we don't change the way in which we approach, if we don't try to change our logic, our grammar of interaction, our language, because sometimes even changing the language, the way to become more inclusive, in which more compassionate. So this is the way of actually resolving the pain in our body or in our society, because sometimes we see the evil, or we see the pain, or the spiritual what we can say, the spiritual weakness, or it where it's not there. So we don't know how to find what is the reason of the current difficult situation that we are facing. So what we are trying to do as our Tawasul, in our work, is not to be impositive, not to have a political agenda. We don't have another kind of agenda, and that one to create a space of knowledge. And the space of knowledge, it will help the society to regain not only spiritual freedom, but actually to regain a spiritual health and a way of approaching things in a different way. So, because if we going on of different individualities, instead of knowing each other, try to find a way to have a conflict with each other. This, in the long run, it will have a real impact, and it will have another way of creating ethos, or creating a youth which is confused, and they can take wrong ways, or they can become easy prey of integralism, or people who just want to promote violence in the name of religion, when there is no violence in religion, because violence can have a different aspect. Not only the violence, not only when in the end you fight with your hands, but when you can also find it with your tongue, you can fight it with your mind. You can be violent in a different way. I think when you are in the end, the last stage, when there is a process, all the process behind. So I think the fight, the conflict, which is an open conflict, when there is actually violence, physical violence involved, I think is always rooted in other kind of violence, in which the society is prepared, and it takes a long time of in a way to develop. So what we are trying to do is to provide this one, is also to have a new way of rediscovering what is past history. Also, we got also now a new journal. We are starting this in the International Journal of Islamic Civilization. It can be an open space for scholars who can have a different approach. Who can, and there's no way of cutting somebody from expressing his point of view, because sometimes also the expression of, it can save a society from becoming self-righteous society, or it became a literalist society, which or in a way, this time with people, they don't feel free, they cannot express their own opinion, and they became in the long run passive, and they will not bring any positive things. I think if we deny the freedom to human being to learn, to understand, to make a choice, to make also wrong decisions sometimes, and we want to create paradise in this world, I think with people, we do not understand nothing about the revelation if we want to create paradise in this world. And if you also see religion as an ideology, actually the ideology is something which is consumed by time, by its own time. If we study what is the history of ideology, every ideology, we see that ideologies are consumed by time. They don't inspire time, they don't inspire future. But the religion, or if we in terms of the spiritual awakening, the spiritual development of humanity, is open to history, is open to future, while ideology is not. I hope that has been clear.
Amazing. I mean, you're a philosopher, so your ideas are so profound and so well thought through. So much to digest there. Your last point about ideologies consuming time, not being open to time, whereas religions, integral traditions, being open to time and ultimately opening up divine time into our lives, because they're, as it were, portals for us to experience the divine present, in our lives. So many things that you touched upon, very, very important points. The narcissism of our present age, which is a very, very, very deep problem. And it seems to me that the narcissism is only increasing because of, not least of all, I think, because of the technologies we have. I mean, the very notion of the selfie. I mean, I've heard other people comment on this. I mean, you mentioned about language, the importance of language, and sort of changing our language to make ourselves how changing our language facilitates the process of becoming more compassionate, things like that. And also language as it exists today is very indicative of our condition, right? So the selfie itself speaks volumes. You know, it's a very self-obsessed age we live in. And I can't help but also think that a society full of narcissists is, if we sort of extrapolate that line, is inevitably going to self-destruct, because the narcissist can never allow for other opinions and other perspectives, whereas the traditional perspective, as you were pointing out, the religious perspective, is one that even if it loses, quote unquote, now, but for the sake of allowing other perspectives to flourish, then that itself becomes a victory. That's a very, very profound perspective that ultimately, to refer back to one of your earlier insights and profound points, that ultimately it's not about us, right? We're at best, facilitators of the unfolding of divine history. And if that is to be true, if that is true, which it is, then we, as much as possible, we're supposed to instead of sort of shoring up the ego, it should be a case of divesting the ego of all its sort of external, um, all the baggage and all the sort of the hardening of that shell. It's absolutely imperative. I'm always struck when I think about, the narcissistic personality, and we all have that potential in us, of course, but it's a question of how much time do we spend. Hopefully we spend less time in that kind of egoic mode as opposed to spending all our time there. But the narcissistic ego, it occurs to me, is very often a very traumatized ego. It's very often it's an ego, person that has undergone childhood trauma and then decided very early on that in order to survive, it must build itself up into this kind of almost like a tank,
Exactly.
And it's very even hard in its physicality, but it's absolutely unsustainable. It's unsustainable in itself. It's unsustainable for everyone else. You're mentioning, Dr. Lei, also about the importance of allowing people to be individuals, not having this perspective of judgment, and which very often, all too often, people of a religious persuasion have, the sort of holier than thou attitude, which is very, very damaging. It should be rather, it should be a perspective of allowing people to be themselves, that every single individual ever in all of human history has his or her own unique life path going back to the divine. And if that is true, which it is from a religious point of view, then my job is to if I'm of a certain age and what have you, then I must really facilitate the realization of that individual's self realization on the path. And I'm reminded also, and I wanted to ask you, because your work, and we'll slowly wrap up, but I'm really enjoying so much your insights, very, very profound insights. And thank you so much. You've also, you've done extensive work on various different topics. One topic which comes to mind in relation to the individual in the sort of healthy, holistic sense is Iqbal, of course, who writes and speaks very powerfully about the self and its relationship to the unfolding of divine time. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit. I've written a little bit about Iqbal and have benefited personally a lot from his insights. I realize in many ways I've come to appreciate that Iqbal's insights vis-a-vis the human ego, not least of all the sort of in a Muslim context, are very, very important for this kind of period. He was writing over 100 years ago now, but his understanding is very applicable to our condition today, from a Muslim point of view. And so if you could, and he has a very powerful metaphor, for example, of burnishing the ego, right? Like the pearl of the ego, as opposed to, he sort of, as you know, he's very critical of the Akbarian sort of Ibn Arabi's sort of notion of the drop just slipping away in the sea, which has no kind of self-identity. Iqbal's very, very interesting, very powerful. He says rather, he prefers the image of the pearl. So could you speak a little bit on Iqbal and his role as far as our sort of our own sort of spiritual journey this time?
So actually, Iqbal, I think, was it could be a real source of inspiration, sorry, for the Muslim now. So in our current time, that as a great thinker, as every great thinker, his contribution go much beyond which is his own time, and that is the case of Iqbal. So Iqbal, that he was a great poet, and for that all the people in South Asia, they know by heart their poetry. But I think should be rediscovered as a thinker, so as a philosopher. And I translated this reconstruction of religious talk in Islam into Italian, and I'm actually studying deeply his philosophy and the fact that his approach is not only for Muslims. So what actually is trying to open is a new way of thinking, is a new philosophical perspective, which is could be shared independently from your religious affiliation. And this I find it quite amazing, because Iqbal, that was a scholar that knew deeply the tradition of the East and also the philosophical language of the West. And he understood that the philosophical language of the West is actually took in what was the place of theology in the past. So philosophy is the language of the West in terms of opening new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching even human life, or at the in personal, social, political level. So, but what Iqbal noticed that there is no free thinking or independent thinking, that if philosophy could be also think as a kind of independent thinking, or a way of thinking which is inclusive. So sometimes people, or especially religious people, this is especially in the history of Muslim, that they see philosophy as a negation of religions. It's not only a potential negation of religion, but as a negation of revelation. So the only fact that the human being can develop a perspective in their thinking, or independent thinking from or taking steps far from religion or from different perspective, it is considered as a kind of something which could lead to lose the faith. So if you are a philosopher, is more this in the imagination of the people, or maybe in some other traditionalists say that if a philosopher is always an atheist. So these two things that they closely go together, but they don't understand. They cannot fully appreciate the reality, the importance of the free thinking, or the capacity to reflect, or to build a philosophical language, a philosophical thought, starting from the premises of your own civilization. And Iqbal, I think, has been extremely brilliant, and this has been also taken by from the scholars who came after him. For example, I think about Al-Jabri, that he noticed also that the same point, but even if he developed in a different way from the social political perspective. But Iqbal noticed that what has been problematic in the Muslim philosophical thoughts, or the philosophical thoughts born in Islamic environment, is the very problematic relation with the Greek metaphysical thoughts, and the fact that Muslim thinkers they start denying the role of philosophy, or of original inclusive discourse based on reason, because they start from the premises from a civilization that was not their own. So, or maybe that was not rooted in the Quran. So what Iqbal tries to do, and I think that he has got some insight that they need that, so they should be really developed. That is a very important starting point for future thinkers, is the fact that he sees in the Quran, he sees in the Quranic language, in some of the Quranic notion of, for example, takbir or qadar, or as or tawhid too, as a new starting point, a new what we can call a philosophical grammar, that we can call it philosophical grammar, to start a new philosophical approach. Because philosophical approach is all what is the in this case. So religion or theology is always something which is could be exclusivist. So because it's a discourse rooted in the premises of a religion, in terms of a revelation which in a way even or a faith which is proper of a group or a what you can call an institutionalized or historical revealed religion. But it is in the Quran as the revelation of God, which is part of the last revelation, and then it is the last revelation from a long history of messages sent by the divine to humanity. And he's starting from the language of the Quran, some of the concepts expressed in Arabic language in the Quran. He created an inclusive language and he created an inclusive philosophical grammar to discuss and enter in an original way in the arena of the philosophical discussions, because philosophy is always inclusive. Because if you think that at the beginning of philosophy in the West, there is Greek metaphysics. So that is actually that's something that has been developed and has been discussed, and in a way also in this long relation with the what it was considered as a strong metaphysical point, a strong metaphysical view, that now it became also the what is called pensiero debole, so the weak thoughts, that there is no foundation, or the philosophy of relativism in that way of what is the lost connection with the human being, with the sacred, or with and what is the repercussion of extreme form of secularism in the philosophical thoughts. But when we discuss, for example, things related to secularism and religion, we are in a way we are creating a discourse which is not in a way inclusive. But when our discussion became rational, but more our discussion became rooted in what would be a shareable space between among different scholars and thinkers. This is where we can have a real original Muslim, or we can call it Islamic philosophy, which is stand at the same level with other philosophical thought, that could be existentialism, that could be classical metaphysics, that would be a Christian thought, or whatever. But if we create something which is a new voice, so I think what Iqbal will try to do is to create a new voice, a new philosophical grammar, which is rooted in Quran, but is not not anyway confessional. So it's not a philosophy in a way designed for Muslims. So it's something that already made for Muslims, that cannot be shareable. But it's a discourse which brings at the different levels the human interaction at the level of what is called independent thinking, through the premises of the Quran. Because sometimes sometimes there is, I think, is a confusion about what is the independent thinking. So the fact that I use reason through the logic to solve some issues, and what is philosophy. So philosophy, in a way, has got this history, has got this grammar, has got a language which is discussed, has been cut all the categories, or the categories like creator, creation, being, becoming, that they are in the way they are expressed according to a long history of development of this philosophical grammar. So philosophy is not you see that thinking in freedom in a way without any relation. Or there is a philosophical grammar which is rooted in the history of human thought, or in a way as is expressed in the Western tradition. But what Iqbal is trying to do is to enter in this discussion, is trying to enter in this debate in an original way. So you see that it recognizes in a way, which has been the limits of Greek thought on Islam at the level of development of an independent philosophical thought. But he enter, and this is in all the several lectures that compose the reconstruction of thought in Islam, he enter into the philosophical reflection through the Quran. And this is very, very much interesting, because he is capable, and he shows this even at the beginning. It shows the possibility of the Quranic revelation to be at the beginning of a new philosophical grammar, to open a new perspective of independent thought and the history of philosophy intended as at the universal level, not all, without consider the difference between the East and the West, because I think Iqbal was much more beyond this these two dichotomical division of the human experience at the intellectual level. Hope that's been clear.
Well, Dr. Lei, you yourself are really well beyond the distinctions of the East and the West, because you belong both to the West and the East, and that's very, very clear to us from listening to you and learning from you. God bless you. You're really a very serious thinker and a very careful and compassionate thinker. I think compassion is also a very important part of should be really a very important part of our intellectual work, because if we produce things intellectually without taking into consideration people's unique specificities, then often that can be the opposite of compassionate. And really, if we're not compassionate in our work, then what is the point? And it's all about compassion, as far as I can tell. And you're deeply learned, very, very powerful thinking. I'm so grateful for your time. We need more people like you. At the very start and before we went live, I was saying, really sharing my feelings about really believing fundamentally that we're at a stage in this sort of human experiment, as it were, where we really need women voices more than ever. Not to fulfill some sort of liberal agenda that family, but because it's about our survival. I really believe this, and you really illustrate in who you are and how you think and what you do. You really, for me, the truth of that you really bring so much to the table, which we all would do well by benefiting from and listening to you, especially men. we need to learn from you, and I wish you all the success in your work, and continued energy and continued support in everything you do. It's such a true honor to be able to speak with you, to learn from you, and I would really look forward to future conversations, future possible collaborations. I really believe also that the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. And if like-minded people, like-spirited people, kindred spirits can get together and work together, I think we can do incredible things. Just a few people, I believe, a handful of people can have a really powerful, transformative impact in the world for the greater good, for ultimately for the divine history to have its full right in the world. So again, I'm really, really honored for your time, for your energy, for your commitment, for your sacrifices. I know that translation work is very hard work, and it's often not appreciated enough for the incredible work that's done in translating a work, because just on the very superficial level, just linguistically, you have to know the language from which you're translating it at a very, very high level, as well as knowing the language into which you're translating at a very high language, let alone the complexity of the philosophical aspects of things when you're translating something like whether Iqbal or whether you're translating the Bhagavad Gita into Italian. So this is really remarkable work. And not only you've translated Yusuf Ali's translation of the Quran into Italian. So these projects are mammoth projects. Just even one of them, if you did, let alone all of these that you're doing and continue to do. So God bless you. God bless your incredible husband and life partner in everything that you do. Please pray for us all, and I look forward to future collaborations. And thank you again for your time and effort.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you
Take
for the
care.
attention. Thank
No,
you
no,
again.
thank you. God bless. Take care. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.